Okay, my friends, today we're going to cover the evolution of chest training and the bench press. And believe it or not, the two are not synonymous. There's a lot more to chest training than just the bench press. So we're going to start out with a little bit of the Big Chest book from Bob Hoffman. The first rendition of this came out in like 1941, then it was reprinted in like 1950 and again in 65. And this guy, Abe Goldberg, who was in the 40s and 50s and had his own gym, had quite the chest and quite the rib box, as you can see. Massive rib box and pretty good bodybuilder all around. And you can see by just the contents in the book, kind of Bob's philosophy on chest training. Every man should seek a better chest, organic strength through the development of the thorax. Big chested men are strong and healthy, and he includes himself, of course, in this group. Getting into condition, the treasure chest of life, so forth. Now, these guys go way back to like the turn of the century, and the last one's in the 20s. Didn't have massive chests in terms of pecs per se. Did have some pec development, but we'll talk about all this. So, of course, Bob starts with, I believe there's more interest among those who are seeking physical betterment in the development of the chest than any other part of the body. And everybody knows, whatever your gym's bench day is a popular day. And of course, how much can you bench is one of the famous things. Eugene Sandow, who was a turn of the century guy a little bit before until a little bit after, supposedly had a 58-inch expanded chest, but not a lot of pec muscle, is what that was supposed to say. Um, and here he goes on. I believe that a man with a large, roomy, deep chest excites admiration and commands attention even more universal than the man with broad shoulders or big arms. Nice if you could have all of the above. The vast majority of those who take up the practice of physical exercise do so to look better and feel better. Although the big, well developed chest, and you can read the rest on your own. Um, but there's Bob, and he talks about how he's like the epitome of health and never gets sick and heals from injuries well, and this, that, and the third. And here he is. Few can be so completely free from the slightest pain or physical irregularity of any sort, have such unusual pep and energy, and more than their share of physical strength. I believe that my own good sized chest has been responsible for much of the wind endurance and rapid recuperative powers I have always shown in athletics and after enforced periods of heavy lifting. Now, of course, the next program that we're going to get into, and based upon some of the stuff that Bob was saying about a big chest in general, not so much packs, is the good old 20 rep breathing squat program. And this is pretty much the Peary Raider version. There's been numerous versions of this, but Raiders program is known by a number of names: 20 rep squats, squats and milk, breathing squats, etc. He recommended that beginners start with either two sets of 10 or more generally one set of 20. One of the big proponents of this was J.C. Heisey, who again was early 19s, like 20s, 30s, I guess, but gained a lot of size, largely from around the squat. And but for added benefits, Rader recommended a precise breathing method that maximizes squat's effectiveness, called the puff and pant method, which is hold your breath during each rep and then pause between the reps with the barbell still in your back and take a deep breath. And then the higher reps you get, the more breaths you take. And there's not really a number of breaths per reps. It just kind of comes natural and you'll feel it. Now, this was the moon bench, which was invented way back and lends itself to the pullover very well, as you can see. And that was the other part that was supposed to help expand your rib cage, was doing the pullovers after the squats. Mark Berry's books, which we'll talk slightly more about later on, but he was big on squats and variations of the bench press, actually. And this is a very old book. Uh, when you're doing 20 rep squat properly, you'll try to talk yourself into stopping short of 20. And that's where mental toughness becomes a must. If you aren't mentally tough before you start, you will be once you get deep into it. If you aren't, you won't stick with it long enough to get results. Every part of you will be begging to rack the weight, to rest, and to quit, but to fight the urge and finish the set. Now, this gentleman was a you saw back in the beginning is a guy named Bobby Pandor, who was a contemporary of Sandow's. And honestly, I think he had even a better physique than Sandow. A little bit shorter. I think he was only like 5'5" or something like that. Then anyway, it talks about after you go through a period of doing just squats, ultimately you add the two arm dumbbell pullovers. You do barbell or dumbbell for a set of 20. And that's right after your, it's almost like a superset after your squats. There's another shot of Bobby from the rear, and you can see he's ripped to the gills. And this is like late 18s, early 19s. Um, Now, Sandow did most of his stuff in the UK, whereas Bobby was more in the European group. And he was in this group, the Probescu Horizontal Bar Act. So he was an acrobat at least. And interestingly, that's a little hint to the next video. We're going to talk about gymnasts and how they're so jacked. But anyway, just a brief note on his training. His wonderful physique was built by high repetition, free exercises like body weight stuff, expander work, and only light weights like 10-pound dumbbells. Now, 10-pound dumbbells were very common back in those days and part of the programs that Sandow endorsed and some other guys. There's Bobby Pandor again, and you could see, he's got his legs were definitely more defined, and I think more defined all over than Sandow. Um, so he had a heck of a physique without doing, and we'll talk about his alternative to squats too, which, he actually, horizontal work, hand balancing, high rep free exercises, sounds kind of like a gymnast. He didn't do squats, but he did like carry his brother up 6 flights of steps on his back when they stayed at a hotel when they were doing their routine. Now, this he was supposedly the first guy who came up with the crab or the most muscular pose. Also has a heck of a neck, as you can see, and he did some crazy stunts featuring his neck strength. Was he the original Nexilla? We talked about the Mr. King, Jeff King, being a Nexilla, and he certainly was. But this guy may indeed have been the first Nexilla. And again, just for the time and well before steroids. So we're going to get into then the history of the bench press. Um, Far and away the most popular powerlifters test. Again, everybody says, how much do you bench? It's the most popular thing. Uh, all the most powerlifting meets, and they're like when I used to compete back in the day a lot. I would compete mostly in bench deadlift contests. Wrestlers of the day also had some pretty good physiques, and especially this guy who's Mr. Hacken Schmidt, who was in the late 18s and into the like mid 19s. He has a little bit of pec development there, although it's not super thick. But he experimented with lifting weights from a lying position in 1898. On the floor, he pulled a 333 pound barbell over his head and pressed it. To pull over and press, as we all know, which you don't see people doing these days. Um, then he rolled over a barbell with 19-inch discs so they could do just straight off the floor. And then we had a lot of times they had like this thing was more like a belly toss where you're on your back like that, and this guy did the same thing with the bigger disc, so he could just roll over his head without having to do the pullover. Um, and that would be Joe Nordquest. Similar lift to Hacken Schmidt using the same diameter weights, and he did 363 and a half, which at the time was phenomenal. Um, and then he improved it to 388 later on. And then Arthur Saxon, who was the Saxon brothers were kind of an acrobatic strongman group, and this is Arthur with that same thing where he's this is like it's not quite a neck bridge. He's on his shoulders and he's lifting his feet and pushing off more to the belly. That's why they call it a belly toss. Um, so in 1931, you had Bill Lilly, who would eventually do toss up 484.75. And that was without all the stuff they have today and before steroids and all that stuff, too. So when did the lift go from the floor to the bench? Who really knows? But it did talk about doing bench presses, sort of bench presses, but off boxes and stuff like that. Again, in Mark Berry's books here, as we showed before. Uh, both published photos of pupils using a bench or box to press on. Racks were not around at that time yet, and of course, neither were lifting suits and drugs and all that stuff. All human knowledge is simply a matter of acquired information. Uh, Most of the information came from the magazines of the time. And this guy started out in the 40s, George Eiferman, had a really good chest, big packs, big thick packs, thick shoulders, and everything else to go with it. And he, of course, did the bench press. He benched 250 for 20 reps, which wasn't his best in 1940 in 49, uh, which may have been the first bench press contest, and took a prize of $50. Bodybuilders discovered the more weight they lifted, the more muscle was developed. And by the early 50s, article after article expounded the benefits of bench pressing. And it talks about this Charles Smith article. And of course, Paul Anderson was not, known for being a great bench presser, but he could bench a lot. This is him doing just a partial, and again, he's like laying on his back, and that was like 700 pounds that he was doing a partial with, but he could bench like 600 for sure. Um, some people were critics and said that, it was a lazy man's exercise and stuff like that. But a lot of even Olympic lifters use the bench press as an assistance exercise. And it gives a list of guys: Tommy Kono, John Davis, etc. Now, Doug Hepburn was known first guy in the world to officially do a 500-pound press. And then again, you can see what he's laying on. It's not, he didn't even have racks. Then came John McWilliams, who also did 500. And there were several other guys of that era who did 500s. So that was kind of the big thing for a while. Reg Park did 500, and again on a rickety old wooden bench at a Health and Strength League display in 1954. Benches obviously weren't like today's. So that we talk about John McWilliams, Don Arnold, who was a pro wrestler, Doug Hepburn. There's Doug again, and it's how to bench press 500 pounds. And Doug had one of his legs was a little bit defective, so didn't get a whole lot of great leg drive. So, he was a very upper body, strong bench presser. By 56, he was able to punch out 7 reps with 500 and later got very close to doing 6, attempting such at a championship in March. And he did 550, but didn't quite get the 6. The ideal bench presser would have a barrel chest. You could read the rest if you go back. Here's Marvin Ader again on pretty shaky looking bench. And Marv was, I think, the first guy that weighed under 200 pounds that ultimately benched 500, and then quoted later on as saying he actually did 515. Collar to collar grip, which was really helped his chest development. And again, they didn't have wrist wraps, they didn't have super wraps, and all this other stuff. And Marv did not do steroids. Didn't even do a lot of regular supplements. Then we have this guy, Chuck Arens, who is seen here doing close grips with 400 pounds for reps, but he did uh, regular bench press, again, on a fairly crude bench. And he did like 400 for 28 reps, as it says here at Muscle Beach. Um, so theoretically, David Willoughby estimated he could have done like over 700 based on that. And then somebody else, limit for a super heavyweight power lift and a bench press at the time would have been 628. Now, then came guys like Ken Lane, Ted Arcidi, Jamie Harris, and so forth. And then here's another Chuck, which was Chuck Sipes, and he was trying to get 600, never quite got there, but he did do 570, and again, he was only weighing like 198, I believe. Um, this is again talking about Paul Anderson with the rack lift. Bored with the limitations of Olympic lifting, British bodybuilders at first practiced a strength set, which was squat, bench, and curl. And then later, the curl was dropped for the deadlift, and powerlifting began. With the passing of the years, record zoomed. Pat Casey was the first to do 500 under AAU rules, and ultimately did over 600. And you could see he's got the massive upper body. He's big all over. He was close to 300 pounds. Then we have Jim Williams, who's another monster, and he did 675 for an American record in 72. Recognized by the USPF prior to sanctioned international competitions. So he didn't really get a world record, although it should have been at the time. Said to have lifted an amazing 705 at a York gym in 1970, and there were legitimate witnesses to that. There he is, and he was just a big dude, and he wasn't just a bench press specialist either. He squatted and deadlifted quite a bit too, and obviously, and he was training partners with John Cook, and they're both Pennsylvania guys, which is where I'm from. Then we have Ted Arcidi, who was also a pro wrestler, which we mentioned in our last video. Took part in super heavyweight class at the '85 Hawaii International Powerlifting Championships, heaving aloft 705, and was able to do 505 for reps. There he is doing the 705, and this was, yeah, he had a bench shirt, but it wasn't anything spectacular back in those days. And then we can't forget, even beyond the bench press and its benefits and variations, that there are some interesting tools we can use. And here it talks about two favorably known appliances lend themselves well to chest muscle building, and that would be the giant crusher grip, which we'll show a picture of, and yeah, I don't have one of those, but I have some other devices, and they definitely do hit, especially the inner pecs. There it is, and you can see when you're squeezing that thing together, it hits your especially your inner pecs very well, which is kind of a tough area to hit. Other than pec deck hits it okay, and like cable crossovers. Then we have, of course, the iron shoe, which you're going in the other direction. It's trying to, instead of trying to push together, you're trying to pull apart, which again also hits those inner pecs especially well, I think. And then, of course, we have the cables, or called chest expanders. And Sipes was big on those. But here's a picture of, and this guy actually has a project for building your own iron shoe. But you can see you're pulling apart the handles, and you got the spring down in the middle, so you're pulling it apart. Um, you can probably find even the original version of these on eBay. These you can still find, and they're still making these today. You can find them at yard sales and so forth. But this is a pretty sturdy looking. So they have like 7 springs, so that's probably pretty tough. Um, and again, that was a very popular tool. So that's about it for chest training. I thank you for watching. Thanks for hitting those like buttons if you do like the video. Sharing the video will help me out. If you haven't subscribed, I hope that you will. Thanks again, and I'm out. And there's a little bonus for you, Bruno San Martino, doing push-ups with 4 people on his back. I'm out. Thanks.